again, it's my pleasure to introduce the first panel of this event, which is going to be a more or less formal discussion between several people working in the so-called arts and science community. And what we're going to try to answer today, or what we're going to try to sketch some kind of an answer to the question, what is art and science, just generally? The idea being simply to get some sort of idea of how to grapple with this kind of question. What is this field? Is it a field? Is it a merging of separate fields, and so on? So just to say a few words, I personally am a PhD student at the philosophy faculty, and I'm working on history of science. And what struck me the first time I thought about it was that, 500 years ago or so, art and science weren't like two separate things. So art, science, and philosophy, for instance, was a single thing, was kind of a continuum of domains of disciplines, which, historical actors were basically on one end of the spectrum or another. But things changed. So, for 400 years since today, things changed rather a lot. And now we have, people are taught in school, for instance, that science deals with certain kinds of stuff and art is another kind of stuff. So we're going to see how this division took place and how, people trying to merge this division approached this kind of new field. So I'm going to now introduce the speakers of today's panel. So first off, we have Anna Dumitriu. So Anna is a contemporary artist. She's exploring all sorts of diverse media and technologies. She exhibited works in places such as Ars Electronica, the Beaux-Arts, the Picasso Museum, the Philadelphia Science Center, and many others. She was the president of the Science and the Arts section of the British Science Association. She is also president of the Institute of Unnecessary Research, which is like a really great name. She won many awards, and she manages the project Trust Me, I'm an Artist. There are many other things to say about Anna, but maybe just say hello to Anna Dumitriu, and she will be what I think she'll do. She'll basically give her perspective on what art and science is. Then we will have Aliya Sakhariyeva. I think I pronounced it right, I hope. Who is head of the Art and Science Center at the ITMO University in St. Petersburg. She's an artist. She deals with art and science education. She's a curator, an art historian, and she's basically managing the first master's program in Russia, I think, on art and science. And she's doing all sorts of other projects, such as the Air, Hybrid Space, and Residency Program. So, hello, Aliya. Nice to have you on board.
Hello, thank you.
Then we have Claudia Schnug, who is a curator and a producer of art, and she deals with broadly all sorts of art and science collaboration and researchers. And she produces institutional collaborations. She manages artist in residency programs, media art projects, as well as various other projects involving art, science, technology, innovation in business, industry, and so on. So hi, Claudia, it's a pleasure having you with us.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here.
So the next speaker will be Horea Avram, who's a curator. His basically one of the most important historians of the new media art in Romania. He's a professor, I think, at the Faculty of Theatre and Film at the University of Cluj, at the Babeș-Bolyai University of Cluj. And he's work focused basically on the history of the new media assimilations in Romanian art. He, for instance, recently curated the Orlan exhibition at the Centru de Interes, I think it's called. And I'm very, very pleased to have him with us. Hi, Horea.
Hello, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And then next up, we have Anik Bluro, who's an art historian, generally a theoretician about art science. She wrote a lot about art science generally, about bioart, about space and art and science, and about aesthetics generally. She's author of the book Meta-Life, Biotechnology, Synthetic Biology, A-Life, and the Arts. And she is, among other things, president at the Leonardo Olaț and managing the Traveling Plant project. So hello, Annick. It's
Hello.
great to have you with us.
Hello, I have a funny voice.
So now I think I would just, put this question on the table. So what is art and science? Is it one thing? Is it many things? Is it, is it what you make it to be? And I would first invite Anna Dumitriu to say a couple of words about this, and I'll be happy to hear her out on this. So Anna, you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, you said a few slides as well, so I've got a few slides and things, so not just
That's
a couple of words, if that's okay. And so, I mean, that's a big question that you're throwing at us. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and then sort of trying to think through that question that you
That's great.
that you posed. Is that all okay, the screen sharing?
Yeah, it's okay.
Cool, lovely. So I was going to talk about transdisciplinary art practice because that's what I do. I think art and science, bioart, that's basically what I do. So I'm going to talk about my work, really, my experience of this. But you mentioned the Institute of Unnecessary Research. And I mean, the central thing there is this idea that art is a meta-discipline. So it can kind of be an umbrella discipline that brings all those things together. So you talked about science and you talked about art and you talked about philosophy. I would also add in there things like history and social studies and ecology and all those kind of things. So it's like when you're studying something, you can't just study it from one perspective. You need to study it from all perspectives. And also, I think maybe from my perspective, art and science is about a transdisciplinary exchange. So where you have this sort of notion of interdisciplinarity, you also have this notion of transdisciplinarity, where interdisciplinarity is kind of sharing ideas and sharing things, but you're both still staying in your discipline, say those two people. But transdisciplinary is actually taking on the methodologies of the different disciplines as well and working sort of more embedded. So I do that. And I have these roles as artists in residence at places something called the National Collection of Type Cultures, which sounds like it might be an artistic collection, but it's actually a collection of pathogenic bacteria. It's the world's oldest collection of pathogenic bacteria. I work in modernising medical microbiology, Brighton and Sussex Medical School. I work in computer science at the University of Hertfordshire with robotics there. I work a lot with life sciences, worked with yeast at the Boku University in Vienna, worked with the EU Chick Consortium on a project called Biotechnology from the Blue Flower. and with the Helmholtz Institute of Epigenetics and Stem Cells. And I've got a few images. So this is how involved I get. This is me in a category 3 biosafety lab holding a petri dish of Yersinia pestis and Staphylococcus aureus. So that's a normal skin bacteria and the bubonic plague, the bacteria that causes the plague. And this is my hand, double gloved inside a glove in negative pressure holding this, and I've been working with this. And that led me on to creating this piece, which is called the plague dress, which is actually embedded with the extracted DNA of plague. And it's a 1665 dress design, dyed with walnut husks, which Culpeper, the herbalist in London in the Great Plague of London, said was a treatment for plague. And it's stuffed full of these kind of lavender and other spices and things that create a strong smell when you experience it. And it's got this embroidery across the chest, which is an actual period embroidery of the time that I've appliqued and then impregnated with the actual extracted DNA of the plague. So it's about telling that story. It's a silk dress. It talks about the travel of the vector of the plague through Europe, through from Canton, from the sort of the steppes region to Canton or Guangzhou as it is now called, and as where this dress initially premiered, and then onto the Netherlands, and then on to London. So it's all about this, and there's a close-up of that. I made this piece during the early days of the pandemic, and it was about the emergency kind of the building of the temporary hospitals, but correlating that with the lack of emergency for people who were kind of locked at home now with maybe partners who were abusive, because it was commissioned through a project at the University of Brighton in collaboration with a charity called Rise, who deal with domestic violence. And so the piece is about these kind of individual beds, this idea of having a safe space to be on your own, but also not having that at the same time. And this work is impregnated with the RNA of SARS-CoV-2 from a plasmid construct. So the actual virus is present in some form in the work. So you have this, as well as the tension of the subject, you have this working with the scientists to incorporate this stuff. And the 3D printed beds are actually based on designs of the beds that were used in Wuhan in the first temporary hospital. Another piece that I made recently was in collaboration with the University of Oxford with a global project called Cryptic, which is about antibiotic-resistant tuberculosis. And they studied 10,000 cases of TB, and they grew each patient's TB in the presence of 14 antibiotics, and they whole genome sequenced the TB that the patients had, so they could see all the DNA and what resistance it had. And they compared those, and they were able to infer from that which antibiotics will treat which TB. So now if you're a patient with TB, you can have the TB whole genome sequence and get the targeted antibiotic right off, which is totally innovative. And bear in mind that antibiotic resistance is what the chief medical officer, the former chief medical officer of the UK, described as big and existential threat to humanity as climate change. So it's a very serious problem. And the piece is about communicating that. So it's an interactive installation. You have these clouds of antibiotics moving around, and then each of these kind of TB bacillus in the installation refers to one person's TB, and it can only be killed by the right antibiotic in the system. And the visitors to the exhibition can kind of take the TB to the right antibiotic. And it also correlates, because of the funding, I was asked to work with data as well. And I made this piece with Alex May too. And we were given data from Gatwick Airport, and the project started before the pandemic. So we were downloading it on a daily basis, all the flight data, and correlating it with all the different collaborators. So we had all the flight data from Gatwick Airport, which was the biggest the most used single runway airport in the world, and now it's the worst hit single runway airport in the world for COVID. So we had the artwork also combines this data, which you can actually see the pandemic starting. So you've got this correlation of the TB stuff and the COVID pandemic, and just the impact of infectious disease, which I consider to be hugely, I mean, we've seen it now, but I've been talking for years that infectious disease is one of the most important things to humanity. One of the biggest risks of climate change is that infectious diseases will increase, antibiotic resistance will increase, things like that. And I do works where people can kind of share their stories as well. This is a piece called Ex Voto, which was in the Valkov Museum in Nijmegen this year. I haven't got time to go into huge details, but it's different people's stories of their experiences of antibiotic resistance, and all the ribbons that they're hung on are stained and dyed with different antibiotics and different dyes that treat bacteria, and bacteria growing from my body and all sorts of things. I work with robotics as well. This piece is called Archaeobot, a post-singularity, post-climate change life form. I work with scientists at the MARA project at Imperial College in London, and work with lots of different organisations, particularly Laboral in Gijón, to bring this artwork to conclusion, and that was in collaboration with Alex May as well. And I mean, this involves a lot of technical side as well. So it's art, science, technology, history, the future. It's thinking about all these different things. And we've just made a new version of this where we're thinking right into the future, and it's a digital version which is launching at the Museo Bolivariano in Santa Marta in Colombia, and it'll be a digital version of this, which is we're thinking about this kind of post-climate change world where the seas have risen, and these robots are the last, containing the last vestiges of human consciousness. You have to read more on the project if you want to know why. They go into details. I get into things like seaweed as well. In the pandemic, I wasn't able to go to any of the labs that I normally work in. So I trained in fine art, I should say. I trained in you know, painting actually, and then and working through kind of this stuff and gaining my interest, it all kind of came together. But I didn't find that biology, which is my big interest, was particularly well taught at school. So I actually dropped it at 14. I dropped the subject completely, and I've gone back in through an art lens. So I did a project in the summer funded by Fabrica Gallery in Brighton, which was about seaweed, basically, this thing that you just ignore unless you're forced to walk on the beach next to your house for months on end because you can't go anywhere else. And I you kind of started to understand this and think about it and research it, and so it became something I was much more attuned to. And I found this amazing book from World War II, which was about the hunt for British seaweeds that could be used to make agar jelly when there was an agar shortage. So this is for use in microbiology for the time when they were trying to create penicillin, and when agar was brought in from the Far East, countries that were blocked off because of the war. I work very much hands-on in the lab, and that was me in the lab at Boku in Vienna. And this is the work that we made there, another project with Alex May, and it's called Fermenting Futures. And it both contains and is basically, it's got a yeast capable of capturing carbon from the atmosphere and outputting lactic acid, which you can polymerize to make PLA. And that sort of white blob on it is a cast yeast colony made from the PLA that we created from the yeast. The other ones are based on photogrammetry scans of the yeast. So we can't make very much of it yet. It's not going to solve the problem entirely. But what they do in the lab is they do targeted evolution. So they keep, because the lactic acid is toxic to yeast. So the yeast that grows and survives in the presence of lactic acid will then be cultured on in the next generation, and then the stuff that survives again in the presence of a bit more is cultured on, and so on. So one day we might actually have a yeast that's really efficiently capable of capturing carbon from the atmosphere and outputting lactic acid, and then you could make PLA, 3D printing filament from it, and have as much plastic as you like and still not add to the carbon problem. So it could be quite interesting. And we made another piece called Culture, which was about how the scientists told us that actually there's an idea that yeast influenced the development of human culture. The fact that we live in settlements was to bake bread and brew beer. So so we made this work, and it's impregnated with the breadcrumbs that they made from a yeast in the lab, because everybody's very keen on baking bread these days, and we use a yeast called Saccharomyces cerevisiae. It's also brews beer, so it's really the only yeast we use to ferment things. And they've understood, we worked with Oscar Atta in the lab, and her work is to understand the mechanisms of fermentation. And she's actually managed to make another yeast ferment. So this is a Pichia pastoris yeast that bread was baked with, and it made the bread rise, and the breadcrumbs of that are from this totally innovative yeast. So it's telling this story about the development of culture through yeast, this drunken monkey hypothesis, as they call it, right up to where we're going now with synthetic biology and yeast and all the different amazing uses of it. And we've also been thinking about the beauty of it. So this is again based on the 3D scans of the yeast colonies, but it's about growing these beautiful pigmented yeasts into it and kind of revealing the beauty of the yeast. And these are yeasts that will damage, if you think of it that way, antiquities, but actually they're beautiful in their own right. And the scientists we work with have this sensation. So they're working with the yeast and seeing these things and going, wow, that's just so beautiful. But we kind of thought it was a kind of aesthetic experience that only the scientists are ever allowed to have. So we've been exploring this as well. And this is called the bioarchaeology of yeast, which brings me on to a project I've been working with the University of Western Attica. And I can't go into big details, but it's a complex work, but it's all about how conservation works and the conservation of bioart. And it's a reciprocal kind of knowledge sharing project where I've been exploring the processes and difficulties of conserving artworks and antiquities, and then creating my own very difficult to conserve artwork, which we've kind of termed the project Unruly Objects and Bioconservation. So so it's got plants growing in it and lots of holes in it and bacteria growing in it, and it's also got RFID tags in it that contain provenance documents and conservation documents that are all on the blockchain. And one of them is embedded in a Vinogradsky column, a bacterial ecosystem. One of them stays with me for care, and one of them's been sent to the university for proper official conservation. This is on at the Kunsthalle Charlottenburg at the moment, and it's kind of a project that brings together a lot of things, a lot of different projects, but it's playing with the idea of what can you understand about medicine when medicine is so advanced. Like, how does a lay person understand what's real technology, real innovation, and what's you know, snake oil? And it plays with these histories of snake oil, apothecaries, patent medicine, and cutting edge technology, and blurs those boundaries. So that's on now. And the very last thing I was doing, my first trip to the lab since the pandemic started, was to the Helmholtz Zentrum Institute of Epigenetics and Stem Cells last week, or the week before last, with Claudia, who's the curator on the project. And this is my first experiment there. So I spent the whole week kind of adding different fluorescent markers to cells, and Claudia was also participating because there's a synergy between the curators and the artists as well at this kind of level in the field. And I got the results through of my project today, and I have to say they're very interesting, but the artwork's coming soon, so I can't tell you too many details. Suffice to say, we were exposing cells to increased temperatures to see what problems it might cause to them. And that's where I'm at now. So basically, art and science is kind of my life. And that's how you get in touch with me. So I'll just stop sharing now and shut up. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was wonderful. I do have a lot of questions, but I think I will keep them for the end. So now I would like to invite Aliya to say a couple of words. So Aliya, if everything's okay, you have the floor.
Okay, just a moment. I'm going to share my screen. Yeah, I hope you can see it and everything's fine.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good evening, everyone. in fact, want to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel with artists and curators. My name is Aliya Sakhariyeva, and I'm the head of the Art and Science Center at ITMO University in St. Petersburg, Russia. And today I'm going to talk about art and science from the educational perspective. And the first thing I want to, just a moment. Yeah. And the reason for this is that I represent ITMO University, and it's the first university in Russia to introduce a master's program in art and science in 2018. In fact, it's an international program which is taught in English, and it should be noted that ITMO University is a technical university. As key research areas are robotics, optics, photonics, computer science, biotechnologies. So, and it's not a classical university, and in the recent couple of years, the university decided to introduce artists to the university to break the work of our labs and to develop something new. So, as I've said, a couple of years ago, in 2018, we introduced the first master's program in art and science with only 10 students at the time. And this is, you can see the first cohort and the first graduation ceremony in 2020 students already. That's a lot, in fact. So for all these years, we were trying to improve the curriculum and amend it because we have more students now. We have new majors in the program. So all the time we return to this question of what is art and science, in fact, because when I was preparing for this panel, I thought that, well, probably talking about art and science from the educational perspective is a little boring for artists and curators. But at the same time, because when you talk about the definition, when you try to define it, you will find numerous definitions from different artists, researchers, and all of these definitions are correct, in fact. However, when it comes to, to designing the curriculum at the university, at the public university, and you have to be more precise. And so there are several things that I want to address my talk today, and about key features that I think art and science has, and if anyone is willing to develop art and science as an educational platform or project, they should probably bear this in mind. Just a moment. Can you see my pictures? Because I'm... Yeah, okay. So for all these years, we've been facing lots of questions, like what backgrounds should students have? What are the core courses that they should take? And what is the right balance between theory and practice, especially when you have a limited number of hours in the program? How many students should we have in the ideal world? Is 10 enough, or maybe 30 is too much? And where will these graduates go eventually? So there are so many questions that we face all the time, and some might even ask, oh, why do you need a master's program in art and science? Because if you talk about all the artists who are now working in Russia, interdisciplinary artists in Russia, well, probably none of them graduated from such a program. Well, if you think about Stoll, for example, or Helena Nikanova.
Aliya, I don't think we can hear you anymore. Okay, I can see you, but I can't hear you. Is anyone else?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So talking about different features, number one is transdisciplinarity. The program that we've developed is open to students from different academic backgrounds. And if we look at the number of students that apply to the program, we will see that we have students who graduated from, who have degrees in physics, in computer science, in meteorology, geology, psychology, social sciences, art history, and many more. So this, on the one hand, this is a huge benefit because students with no artistic background can enter the world of contemporary art and create their own projects and present them. On the other hand, it's a challenge for us because we have to try to find the ways that will create a common ground for all these, say, 30 students with different needs, with different backgrounds, and asking so many different questions. And another thing why this is extremely beneficial and why this is a benefit is because in this super transdisciplinary teams, we see fantastic projects that remove all the boundaries between disciplinaries, and students can create amazing projects. Well, at the moment you can see the project, students are working on the Plant Vision project in Ippolit Markelov's artistic studio. So all of them have absolutely different skills, absolutely different backgrounds, but somehow they managed to work together and develop it further on. And by doing so, in fact, by working in these multidisciplinary teams, students learn to collaborate, and that is probably, that is the key, this next key feature, because collaboration is the key. Just a moment. What is important when we talk about art and science in the university is that we are talking about equal relationships between artists and scientists, because it often happens that artists can come to scientists and ask them to help them to implement their projects technically. Or scientists can invite artists and say that, well, please, can you do visualization of this or that project? Can you help us to present this project properly? So this is not the case that we want to develop at ITMO University, and we are trying to teach our students to learn to collaborate with so many different students from different teams, because we understand that basically it's impossible to teach an art history student a molecular biology within one year, or make them become robotics engineers. So they have to learn to listen to each other, to understand each other, and to communicate correctly. Another thing I want to talk about is transformation that art and science brings to the educational system, because by removing all the barriers and existing boundaries between disciplines, in fact, we introduce so many projects that change the way things work at the university. For example, one of the key tasks of our center, Art and Science Center at ITMO University, is to communicate to students from so many different departments, like to explain what art and science is to robotics students, to biotechnology students, to computer science students. And these students don't have any background in education. So we develop different projects that help them to develop at least creative, what we call creative thinking. For example, for undergraduate students, we introduced a course that was called Minor in Art and Science, which means that a student which studies computer science can have a minor in art and science and create his own project. It's not something new to most European universities, or especially American universities. However, in Russia, there is no even like official framework for us to do this thing, because you cannot have a major in one field and a minor in another field. So even like technically, it's very complicated to introduce. If we talk about graduate students, for example, not only our master students, this year we introduced an initiative which is called Diploma as an Art Project, and it allows students again that study at many different programs create their own projects and present them as final projects. participate in our graduate exhibition as if they were our students, which is also, I think, a great opportunity. And I'm grateful that at our university, we found a legal, like an official way to kind of to allow students to do that, because if you look at the system of education in Russia, it's also really hard to present your final thesis as an art project. And when we talk about another thing and another initiative that we introduced in this year's is the Residency Program. And that's our way to work with our research centers and labs. In 2020, we announced an open call for interdisciplinary artists. And this year, we finally were able to bring one of the artists to ITMO University. So that's another way of, in fact, breaking the way our labs work and introducing them to artistic practices. Well, by opening the residency program, we also opened the hybrid space, which is called AIR. So it's an exhibition space, it's a studio space, it's also the residency space for artists and researchers. We invite students to our exhibitions and events, and it's priceless when you see robotics students or some other students with technical background look at the works, ask questions, and suggest some different ways of probably presenting these projects. So what I want to say is that by bringing art and science to an institution, to an educational institution, we gradually start to transform the way things work in this institution by bringing in different formats like artistic studios, residencies, different other projects as minors or diplomas in art projects. And I do believe that eventually this will transform the whole education system in general, because this is a very lengthy project, like a lengthy project. It won't happen in 1 day or 2 days, and it's probably very difficult to measure the effects of our work and how this transformation is happening. However, this will happen one day, and I'm sure that it will happen exactly thanks to art and science. So basically that's it. Thank you very much. So these are the photos of different projects that we had and the students. Should you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Aliya. I mean, if anyone has any question, I think he or she can go ahead. I was thinking initially that we could just take some questions at the end of every talk. So I personally do have some questions. So, but maybe we should just leave them and jump right to Claudia, which will say a couple of words about what's art and science. So the floor is yours.
So, thanks. I need to share my screen also. Is it possible?
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, now I got the. So I will take an additional perspective on what is art and science and what is this. Try to answer this question from a different perspective. So I want to talk about exploring art and science collaboration, or as a means, because this is actually also the means that I try to approach it. And again, another very different perspective, as I will explore it a lot from a more workflow process and interpersonal process, not only interdisciplinary, but also interpersonal process, and a format perspective. So I start quickly again with who I am. So this is me at the video shooting for the Traveling Plant, the wonderful project initiated by Anik Bluro, you mentioned before. I I do a lot. So before you mentioned that I'm curating a lot and that I'm consulting and working with different institutions and different levels to create art science processes, art science collaboration, residencies, and other projects. I'm involved in curation and curatorial projects. But I'm also a researcher with a background in social and economic sciences and art theory and media arts. Mainly actually in social science and economic theory. So I have really this perspective on the processes, on the people, and on how people come together, work together, and how this influences actually their processes and this kind of work that they are doing. And so this is why I want to have a focus on this in answering what is art and science, or focusing on art science collaboration. So what is art and science? Actually, this is very broad. So arts is a broad term, science is a broad term. And actually it's even used broader than these two terms are here. So there is a lot art and science, art and technology, art sci-tech, art science as one term. And there are many different approaches. And then you could also go into specific art forms with science, or you could go in bioart and argue from a very art theoretical perspective, what is this kind of art science? How is it positioned within contemporary art theory? How is it positioned within contemporary art? What does it do or contribute to science or the specific field of science? So there are a lot of questions, and I think it's very difficult to make a specific taxonomy of what is all out there and say there is this form of art and science and this and this and that. So I find it actually rather easier to say there is art science collaboration. There are actors from different fields who come together and who practice something that is now called somehow the field of art and science, or they are called practitioners of art and science. And this is mainly actually expressed through the work process and how they come together and where they contribute. This actually is also often connected to different kind of formats. So when you talk about art science or art science collaboration, you actually often talk, as we heard before, about different forms, how this can emerge. So there are artist in residence programs, there is artistic research in the collaboration with science, there's artistic research residencies, there is long-term, short-term collaboration, there's a process focus, there's an outcome focus, there are artists who are exploring new technologies, and somehow this is all brought together in this big field or community of art and science. So how can we say to all these diverse things that it's all art and science and somehow art science collaboration? And there is somehow a little bit of not only one thing that is emergent that is coming out of these things, but I think when you look at different projects and different processes, and actually also how the process contributes to immediate or later outcomes, you can see that all these things have something in common. So I quickly wanted to go through a few projects that I'm working with that are very diverse, but all somehow can be subsumed under this bigger idea of art and science. So first of all, there is an artist in residence program. This is the artist in residence program with Dumitriu that she just mentioned before at the Institute for Epigenetics and Stem Cells at the Helmholtz-Zentrum in München. And this is a residency program. So there is somebody called, or a scientific institution mainly, calling for an artist to work with the artist for a specific purpose, idea, or even just because they're interested and they want to engage with that. And these residency forms programs can be very short. They can have 2 months in duration, or you can have a few visits over longer periods, like a year or 2 years, but actually there is mainly maybe even online interaction, and there are a few visits on site, but there is still this collaboration and these artists and scientists coming together and working together. And here we've got a very interesting idea of how the artist is working with, is learning, is working with scientists and few ideas that came up in this process of explaining, but also exploring her own ideas and then translating it into an art piece. And then we have our tech collaboration, which is also often subsumed and which must, or is not necessarily a residency program, but can be like other art science collaborations, ongoing projects. And this is actually a project that I've been working with lately. It's Tech Sense, and it was a collaboration, or it still is a collaboration between a media artist with a focus on sound arts and actually performance, in collaboration with a startup developing an AI application for journalists, which was founded by computer scientists who engage in computational creativity. And this collaboration actually originally was meant to bring together these different perspectives and create an artwork based on the idea of the application, but it then developed into an exploration of different things that came up with 3 different outcomes. Using the database of the startup to create an artwork, but also some valuable contributions to the science and to the startup. And the first one is the valuable contribution to the startup, which is a 2D visualization, which would not have happened without the collaboration with the artist. The 3D visualization, which was originally part of this idea, came back to a scientific question because the editors and journalists had difficulties dealing with it. And then we developed this artwork, which brings in different aesthetic components to understand what the application of the startup actually deals with. And it's not only that journalists can explore sources outside of their filter bubble, but also how these filter bubbles are generated. And so this is one aspect of how artists and scientists can work together and how it can emerge or it can contribute, and why this field of art and science is so interesting to so many people right now. And it's another way, so we have media arts and we have AI researchers and creativity in computation researchers, and companies, whereas in the other case we had stem cell researchers and an artist who is very much based in this field of working with microbiology. And then there is another thing where you can bring in artists as an interdisciplinary contribution into research projects. Exploring, for example, the algorithmic bias in and how it relates to human rights. This is another project that I'm engaged with right now, and which again creates other processes and other contributions. And another way is to think of a research residency, which is more focused on the exchange between the artist and the scientist, instead of looking for a specific outcome, which is more really going into the depth of specific ideas that are present in the science, which could then be also interesting for an artist and become the basis for interesting exchange, conversations, and maybe new ideas. So these are all very different, and it's a little bit daring to say everything is somehow the same. So I tried to understand, and here again my research background from a social science perspective comes in, trying to understand what do these things have in common, and why are they somehow brought together. And of course there is one thing, that there is this big call for inter and transdisciplinarity, which always says that this is a valuable combination, but actually bringing the arts in is more than just inter and transdisciplinarity, because it's any discipline. So art has more qualities, also aesthetic qualities and other ways to talk about ideas than any other scientific discipline. So this is one aspect. And the other aspect is that there are many levels of impact that are identified when you bring together art and science. So you want to reach some specific outcomes. And these can actually also be linked to more traditional research within artistic interventions in business, where you can also see that there is a lot people think that you can do with the arts when you engage with the arts from a different perspective, when you bring it in new environments. So what I did there is actually to look at all these different ways of creating art-science collaboration, look at what is happening there using more qualitative scientific research methods to better understand why people want to work together between arts and science or arts and technology, and then to better understand the processes, and from there to derive why, how to work together and what these fields actually constitute somehow. And of course, these ideas of what we should do and what we're interested in are a big part of that. So this is actually a list of mainly social scientific theories and psychological theories, looking at how people try to understand the value of art-science collaboration and what are these different, what can it bring to the process in order to justify the means of bringing an artist, which is not a standard means and actual additional costs. And when you go from there, you actually can see that bringing these disciplines together has an important impact on the process, and then also has great outcomes, but they need not be immediate outcomes. And thus you have this duality of process focus and outcome focus, but at the same time, you are not really caught in this taxonomy of what are the outcomes and who is collaborating with each other. When I study the process and then start to get this very strange feeling of how can I define art and science, instead focusing also on the process and understand how people from these disciplines, especially also with the arts qualities, work with people from research or from science and from tech development to understand how this field could be called a field and a community. So yeah, so actually bringing all this together, I then try to say that there is the process and there is the outcomes, but there are also multiple needs, and actually this constitutes what we now somehow call this field of art and science and how it evolved in the last few years. Because of course there are, with all these calls also from business and from science and from politics, there is a lot of interest. And actually these insights you can then use also to create, custom create these art science collaborations. And here I just want to point out that there is the most important things are actually the resources, and that's time, space, and openness. And this openness also means really engagement, personal engagement, and really having this, taking this deep dive. And here I just want to have a few words. Going back to what is art-science collaboration or what is art and science, and actually it's a lot of things, but when you try to look at the process and how people come together, it's easier to understand how art and science could be defined instead of getting lost in taxonomies and trying to say this is art science and this not, this is bio art, this is not bio art, or all these things and how they are connected. And it's due to a lot of interest. It's of course a growing field and a growing community right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. So a lot of food for thought here. One thing I should maybe mention, if anyone watching on any streaming platform on Facebook or whatever feels like he or she wants to drop a question, feel free to do that, and we will do our best to pick them up and address them here. So that being said, I had this curiosity, so I would really be curious to ask Horea Avram about his recent exhibition with Orleans. So if Horea would like to say a couple of words about, you know, his recent events he was doing, it would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Ovidiu. Thank you, all the other participants. Well, I won't jump directly to the most recent experience. I would step a little bit before and say a few words. I don't have a formal presentation with some slides like the other participants here, which was absolutely amazing. I don't have such a presentation. However, I just wanted to say a few words about this I don't know, great and at the same time extremely precise and very complicated question. What is art and science encounter? Where do they meet? How they work together? Well, I go a little bit from a personal point of view. I mean, not personal, but research-wise, my research point of view. I studied for my PhD what is called augmented reality and augmented reality art. More exactly, the visual and experiential, more exactly, paradigm of augmented reality. When I started the research at the beginning of 2000s, I didn't know too much about this. I mean, I knew the term back then. From 1997, when I attended a talk by Roy Ascott,
Alo.
who everybody knows,
Da?
who's the...
Da, eu sunt.
Mihaela, ai microfonul pornit? Dacă poți să-l închizi.
Just a second, Mihaela, can you please mute your mic?
Okay, thank you. So the term itself I've encountered in 1997 when Roy Ascott, a veteran in the field of art and technology, gave a talk to in Cluj, and he mentioned for the first time augmented reality, which was quite shocking. Why? Because virtual reality, it was something really new, very new. And his point was, okay, virtual reality is passé. The new thing is augmented reality. And I was, okay, but we just found out about that. It's already gone. Well, he actually was a visionary, and he always was like this. And the place to find out about this was a little bit, I don't know, unlikely. It was in Cluj, my hometown, which is in Romania, which is Eastern Europe. You wouldn't expect it to find out about the most recent things in that context. However, that was the moment when I found out. So I was very much interested into that. I researched about augmented reality and then put out some studies about this. But what I wanted to say with that is that during this research, it was a long time research, which spread for a number of years. From the very beginning, when no one knew about it, since now when everybody knows about augmented reality is everywhere. Everybody knows about it, or seems to know about everything about it. Anyway, during this research, I've read a lot of tech literature, that means engineering literature and computer science publications, which obviously for me as an art historian were things that were completely strange to me. However, I tried to understand them, and it was a fascinating exercise to try to understand and to extract from there things that were useful for me. So that was a sort of the way that I put together this encounter between art and science and how they work together. I think that it's it's important to perhaps put that in words. Everybody perhaps here knows that, but perhaps it's good to put into words, especially for all the presupposed audience we have tonight. That is, art and science is not that situation when people try to explain everything through science. I mean, art explained through science. Nor is that situation when I don't know, beauty comes up in way or another in science and becomes part of the science. It is a rather complex intersection of a specific, although extremely diverse way of making art through research. And all the Anna and Aliya and Claudia explained in excellent this encounter, and I think it's precisely this. So we beyond any I don't know, tentative generalization by so many I don't know, authors, especially in media and in popular literature. That is something that when science become interested in art, or the other way around, it's an art practice that is profoundly shaped, the two sides profoundly shapes the other one. Indeed, we can notice that in the recent years, at least, we have more and more examples into that in that direction. That means an increasing number of artists beginning to let's say get science, to understand science, and to try to apply that more and more. But we should note that actually this is an old story. It's not new at all. If I don't know, if just jumping back to the modern times, that means, I don't know, the end of 19th century, not going much before that, because we can do that. But if we are to mention only, for example, modernist intersection between those two, we have to remember Georges Seurat, for example, his solution called pointillism. Was inspired actually by Michel Eugène Chevreul's discoveries about how our eyes perceive and process colors. It was something up to date that Georges Seurat studied and sort of applied to his art. I mean, it's more than applied. I mean, he developed a whole method stemming from that. Then another example is Futurism, which was influenced by research in the field of chronophotography. Cubism can be also linked to the advent of X-rays and Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, and it's surrealism, perhaps the most evident example, arose in part as a visual exploration of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis, and so many other examples, especially in a more recent period when including media technology, media technology plays a crucial role in art making and in art dissemination today. And also, perhaps it's important to remember, because I'm an art historian, I have to note that as well. In 1900, when Alois Riegel, the art historian Alois Riegel, became the first art historian to ask how art and science overlap. And his research led him to theorize how the viewer works with the artist to fill in the perceptual and emotional gaps, thus happening is a sort of completion of the work of art between the two, which is an extremely interesting point of view, which was later developed in so many ways. So if the principles of convergence between art and science were, we can say, always the same, the only thing which is different now is the means, the tools, the principles, the tools and the principles which are much more diverse today. And I think this is something that we definitely take a closer look upon. And that's the sort of, I don't know, overarching thoughts about the thing, and I stop here. And I have some other thoughts and questions, but I rather stop here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Horea. So I'm fascinated by the fact that, you know, if you put this on the table, like the relationship between art and science, it seems that they're already connected, right? I mean, they're kind of implicitly already connected somehow below the background, as it were.
This is what they say.
Great. So I will save any questions for after all talks. So the last talk will be by Anik Bluro. So I'm very excited to hear her and would ask her to take the mic. Anik.
Thank you. Let me share my screen.
Okay. All is well.
Okay. Yep. So I would like first to thank you to have invited me to this panel tonight, and with such an incredible and brilliant company. So art science, what is art science? This is, before I should introduce myself in 2 sentences, I'm not an art historian. I define myself more as an art critic and a curator and an organizer, let's say in general. So art and science is for sure a tricky question, and I guess it's the same as asking what is art. So I believe it takes maybe a philosopher or an anthropologist to answer this question. And since I'm neither one or the other, I'm trying to take other paths, maybe to avoid the trap and try to untangle the knot. I've worked for Leonardo now over 2 decades, and Leonardo is the Franco-European branch. Leonardo Olatz is a Franco-European branch of Leonardo Izast. So I worked for it for over 20 years. I committed this special issue of the journal, of the magazine MCD about art science. And I've been collaborating as a freelance writer to the contemporary art magazine Art Presse. But over all this, I never ever recall myself having said or written, oh, that is, this artwork is a wonderful art science piece. So that may have said it's a wonderful installation, it's wonderful this or that, but never it's a wonderful art science piece. And actually art science is actually a very strange and fuzzy construct where none of a term qualifying with the other. I've never heard, or actually I've never used the expression scientific art nor artistic science. And I think this is interesting. So as the other have said, and as Claudia showed, it's a very multifaceted environment and a nebula, actually, that does not define, from my point of view, a genre, nor an aesthetics, that is not embodied in a medium or a form. And Claudia, you mentioned this thing that some are processes, others are outcomes. So I think this is also interesting. That does not embody a single conceptual or ideological approach, and I won't go into details here. For me, there is one question which is important: is what do we understand when we say science in art science? We under one single word. We are including very different things that are raising very different issues, processes, treatments, actions associated to art. One of them is, as exemplified by Anna, is the access to specific instrument or environmental or environments. For sure, if you need a biosecurity lab 3 or 4 to do your work, you have to do some kind of art science collaboration. If you need the big telescopes that are in the Atacama Desert to do your art, you need to do art-science collaboration, and so on and so forth. But I think there are other elements. This is Anna who mentioned methodologies, and I think also you, Claudia. So the methodologies of science and methodologies of art is also a way to do art science that may be very different. One point which is very important to me is this one: knowledge and facts. Science is knowledge and facts, and quite a large bit of it is available via internet currently, and data is too. I mean, you just have to log. If you know how to search, you will reach it, and you don't need necessarily collaborations to develop an art science project because this information is already available. Another question is, and I will come back to it, is potential, the use of scientific research and outcomes, and potentially the misuse of those results and outcomes. And this is not a scientific issue per se, but a societal one, and it's where ethics come into play. And this is also something I will give an example later. But I think that more important, when we say art science, we talk about the Western positivist belief and approach to the world, defined by the Western scientific approach. And this is interesting because it's currently slowly shifting to other kind of science, like vernacular science with a witchcraft movement, ecofeminism, and the other cultures' way of quote unquote scientifically knowing the world, or describing the world, or understanding the world. So I joined the laser community, that is the Leonardo Art Science Evening Rendezvous, and and I launched Laser Paris with this very expressed goal. I mean, it was a stated goal to explore and present as much as I can the different modalities and aesthetics of art science creations and collaboration. And for instance, this project, My Core by Sandra and Gaspard Bébier-Valérian, does not involve any collaboration with any scientists. It's a work involving a blob, involving AI, and a lot of things I don't have a time to describe. But they did their researchers by themselves. We read a lot of scientific papers, and they did the experiment into their kitchen, because you can grow a blob in your kitchen without that much of a problem. This project is Jonglerie Musicale, musical juggling, is a very hardcore mathematical and computational project. But what is interesting is that the two, and it's an art science or an artist and scientist collaboration. But what is interesting is that the two scientists collaborating with the juggler are themselves jugglers, and the question raised by the artist is, for some part, an unanswered question for the mathematicians. So they are working super hard to answer the question and to develop projects. But there is also one thing which is important for me, is that when we talk about our art science, we mostly talk about hard science. Humanities are vanishing, or almost. And I'm just mentioning very quickly here, I mean, yeah, all the social science and the humanities are not, or very less taken into account. Maybe it's because art is a social science, I don't know. In this project, Anaïs Tonder worked actually with an anthropologist. Her name is Marine Legrand, and they worked to propose a gift to the wolves to help them repair a poisoned soil near Paris. And the gift was this bowl made out of galalite, And galalite is a stone obtained using milk that would degrade over time in the soil. Of course, it didn't help. It was not meant to really help the worms for real. And of course, you do not create rituals from scratch. But it was a very symbolic piece, but this is exactly what rituals are. They are not effective, but symbolic, and they are effective because they are symbolic. And it's giving something precious for you. You know, it's giving something that is important for you. And this bowl is made out of the milk of Anaïs, because she had just given birth to her first child. So there is by creating artificially this ritual, Anaïs, Tondeur, and Marine Legrand unfold the nature and process of rituals and giving. I don't have time to describe this work by Anne Brody, but it's also a work which is mimicking the scientific methodology of sampling in Antarctica and reflecting about the anthropological situation of the researchers and all the workers being on an Antarctic base. Can talk about it more if you like. Here I have just listed a few questions or threads for inquiries, either that I have often encountered or that I'm asking myself. And I'm only going to talk about the two first ones. Anna has already, and Claudia have already talked about the cross methodologies. So I often hear that that art in art science is not here to illustrate the science which is made, and that needs to have a kind of more critical approach. And I strongly oppose this. And this is an example where an artwork is a very interesting scientific illustration. And I think, I guess a lot of you know it. It's this work by the Verton sister, Margaret and Christine. And it's about how the title is Hyperbolic Crochet Coral Reef. And it's a mathematical illustration or embodiment, in this case, of hyperbolic space. And many marine creatures are actually, their bodies are actually hyperbolic, represent hyperbolic forms. So here you have this very straightforward embodiment of what an hyperbolic form and space is. And it's also a warning about the problem of climate change in the Great Barrier Reef. And I have loads of examples where art is illustration of scientific research and is wonderful art pieces in their own right. Science accuracy versus art integrity. I will just mention this, that there is one question is, does art has to be true to the science it is working with, working upon, and dealing about? Should it present the exact facts and knowledge of science? Or can we have what we call a poetic license? Currently, in time of strongly alternative facts and realities, of crisis of science, of real discovery and achievements that sometimes look like pure science fiction, of a growing complexity, as Anna mentioned, in understanding the new scientific knowledge, and of viral communication on social network, as the pandemic has shown. It's a very hard question. And here it was a work done by Jean von Coubertin on this finding remains of the sirens which of course does not exist. But it was put in a place where you have a lot of science, and it was highly critically opposed by scientists, because they said it's misleading. It's misleading to the people that are coming to this place, because they know it's a huge fossil zone in the south of France. And I think this is my last slide. So when preparing this presentation, it made me reconsider what I'm working about currently, and asking myself, by the way, is it art and science or not? I have this, my ongoing space art science projects with Leonardo, and the next one is on October 26th. It's this symposium on which bodies in for space. And for sure, there will be scientists, and there will be artists, and maybe a little bit of art and science. This one is the Roots and Seeds 21 Biodiversity Crisis and Prompt Resistance. We just did this workshop last week in Paris, and here is part of the results of what we have been doing during 2 days. And for sure there were artists and scientists, and for sure there was art-science collaboration among the people participating. And this one is Paola Bruna's work, The Cruel of Tucuman. The curation was done by Tatiana Koroshkina and the team of co-artists, and it was the first exhibition in the Traveling Plant Project. And I don't believe there is any art science in it, and I'm fully happy with that, because this is one of the most wonderful artwork that I have experienced in the last months. And to conclude, for me, what the artwork is about is important, but I'm as much interested in the how it is conveyed. So in other words, by how the translation, the interpretation, or the horizontal transfer, to use a more contemporary metaphor, is conveyed, embodied by the artist in the artworks. And if I had to give a definition, art science is at the French, this undecided zone of permeability between porous metaphors. And metaphors is really a key word for me, dealing with art science. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annick.
Yeah, I have to
really a lot to think about. So thank you everyone for your talks. Now, I mean, I think we can just, shift to a more informal part of our meeting today. If any one of you or anyone watching us live on the internet has any questions, feel free to send them by. Until then, I will use my privilege as a chair, and I would like to comment something on Anna's talk. So Anna, I was like really struck by the fact that, basically in your talk, maybe you didn't intend to do it, but you made me think of, art and science as a kind of tool, right? As a kind of means to achieve certain ends. So I was thinking, you gave the example of, the development of the yeast in the, let's say, history of mankind. And I was just curious, how do you think about this? So basically, in this sense, art and science, I mean, including your works as well, could be just a tool to understand the past. So, for us to understand how, primitive societies and so on were functioning, we could use some sort of recreating their, experiments, their processes, their cultural practices, their so on, which include this kind of thing. So basically what I found like very illuminating in your talk is the idea that, aside from like all these divisions, which may be more artificial or not, basically art and science can also be a tool in which we can really understand things about, humans, about human history, about anthropology, about culture, and so on. So that was I think that was just a comment. I mean, it's not really a question, but
I mean, I guess a tool, it can be so many different things. It's like all the speakers have kind of alluded to. It's lots of different things and working at the same time on all those levels. So you've got, yes, there's an element of communicating ideas in science, but it's not just a tool for understanding the past, it's the means of trying to get a handle on the future as well, because the works take you through a thread from I really like to look back and see what's happened in the past and where we're going in the future, and see if we can kind of learn from those things, because generation after generation we repeat the same mistakes. And this is a question that bothers me a lot. So this like, why does this go on, and how can we change it? But obviously, it's a tool and a method for me to make my art as well. I mean, that's what I do. I'm a tool to create the art. I think my body is just a tool that creates the art. So I mean, yes, but like, I think it's bigger than that, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. I wasn't expecting this kind of function, as it were. It was just a kind of a surprise for me. We have a question from a viewer watching us online. So it's Thomas Kloiber, if I pronounce it correctly. So he says he's wondering if the collaboration of art and culture will be a proper field to implement the approach of digital humanist, which means, quote, putting people back at the center of technological developments and making them the benchmark and rule for digitalization processes. And he thanks us for our comments. So would anyone want to answer Thomas, or does anyone have any thoughts? I take it that, putting the people back at the center of technological development simply means, making our technology and making our science to be more human, as it were. I mean, to be much more oriented towards, here and now human ends, or something like that.
I may take a side path here again, answering him. I don't think that art science or anything per se as the answer to any problem. I think it takes the whole society to solve the problems. But maybe there is one question which is on my mind too, is we talk about art science, and maybe it's more about artists and scientists. Instead of being those big chunks of, with capital letters of art science, from my experience and from listening to everybody in this field or talking, it's always an encounter between people. And in this respect, it's really, yes, putting back people, humans and other than humans at the center instead of something which is those abstraction of art science.
May I add to this? Because I
Sure.
think I'm very much in line with Anik's thoughts there. Going back to, I'm not sure if we can say arts and culture or arts and science is the one way to go to put the humans back at the center of technology. I'm also not sure, because technology is human-made, so it's still somehow at the center, but it's a very much, it might be a really good tool in, for example, exploring together between scientists, artists, and engineers, tech developers, to better understand what does this technology do with us, or even go that far as you asked Anna before, is it somehow retrospective, or a tool or means to learn from the past? So I think art has a lot of qualities where you can make new connections, and that allows you to step out of these disciplinary boundaries, and also about ask questions about what are the values that we are dealing with. So it's not just philosophy, but it's really going beyond that. What are the values that we're dealing with? So there is no, it's not a coincidence that there is also a lot of art in the field of political art, activism, and all these other dimensions. So I think there is a lot there, and that helps to frame and support these discussions and the developments, and also the discussions with the scientists and engineers, but maybe even on a more political level and more organizational level, to better understand what could be an impact that's coming out later. And yeah, I think that then there are also many other aspects about art that are special in this interdisciplinary meeting, and here the aesthetics comes in, this experiential quality, and helping to understand possible implications, maybe also from a more non-rational, more experiential perspective, which is actually very important, because we day in, day out, we hear a lot of arguments and we don't know how to follow, but an experience, a story, and how we relate to it, and how we feel about it, and how we see and hear has a completely different quality, and helps us to maybe grasp something in a different way, or in a new way, and frame it also differently. Sorry, this was a long answer.
Oh, no, sorry, that was great. I actually thought about two other things which I would like to hear your opinion on, namely this. So, for instance, Claudia, you've mentioned a lot of, a lot of kinds of programs in which art and science is happening, so to say, right? So I'm very interested in what you think about what's the kind of, how do I put this? What's the organizational form in which these take place? So something like this. So is it necessary for art and science to collaborate via institutions? Can we have? So is it top down all the time? Is it not? Is it like person to person? Is it not art and science? It's like artists and scientists and so on. I mean, is it feasible? And maybe ask everyone else, how do you manage with which I'm sure it is a common problem, which how do you manage the gap between the education which a scientist gets and the education which like an artist gets? How do you kind of?
These are many questions, but maybe to start with, also going back to Annick's last slide, or last but one slide, where she says maybe art and science is some kind of this porous space in between where they meet. And I think it can be institutional, and you often need institutional background to get the funding, to have the time, to get the possibility to use the labs or other equipment, but also to be able to realize cost-intense projects that need a lot of workforce or a lot of materials. So I think there, the institutional background is good to have. And it's also good to have an institutional background if you really want to bring in projects that affect a bigger group of people, and that then can somehow be distributed throughout the organization, and also affect bigger parts of values and ideas or organizational culture. But it's not the case that everything has to be in an institution. there is a lot of meetings in between the spaces, in this porous space between art, science, technology, individually, or
so
one person coming to a group or whatever. So there is a lot of possibilities.
So there is a community, as it were, which is independent from, you know,
I'm not sure if it's always a community. There's one person who has an interest and contacts somebody else, or there is an artist or a scientist who knows an artist and who has a question and starts a conversation. So it can help in many ways, but the more institutionalized it gets, the more important it is to have also other frameworks like curation or facilitation, creating the best environment. So, but I think Horea also wants to add something here. So, and I'm sure everybody else also has something to add here. So.
Aliya, would you like to?
I would like to mention the importance of access to the labs and research centers, because sometimes if the project is really complicated, if you need a tissue culture lab, for example, you just won't find it, and you need to have access to the certain either research center or university. So it's in this sense, institutional support and help are really important. And another question is the production costs, which are normally quite high for art and science projects. And it is really important that there are different ways of funding and opportunities for funding for such projects for artists or even institutions. For example, we face it every year with lots of students which come with huge budgets and ask for money. So that's another thing. Another thing that I want to mention is that even though there might be institutional and organizational possibilities, it is also, I think art and science is also about chemistry, like something that you cannot define between an artist and the scientist. So you have to find your perfect match, because otherwise you might have access to the labs, funding, but if two people cannot negotiate and cannot communicate correctly and find the ways to collaborate, unfortunately, I guess it won't work. So that's another factor you have to take into consideration. Thank you.
No, thank you. Horea, would you like to add anything to this?
Well, actually, I have a question, and if no one wants to add to the issue you just raised, I would have a few thoughts and a question, if I...
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Well, my question is related to the I mean, is there a risk involved into this, I don't know, this pairing, this equation, this putting together of art and science? Because as I read it and as I see it, it presupposes a certain, I don't know, a moving terrain, at least. Perhaps not a risk in the sense of, I don't know, being in danger of doing something wrong, but at least of putting under the question mark in a big way. And I have in mind two things, for example. I have in mind, for example, the fact that one of the most important, art historians and visual studies theorists and commentator, which is James Elkins, who affirmed, if I'm not wrong, in What is an Image, in his book, he actually never disguised the skepticism with regard to the difficult task of basically developing a science, because his task was to develop what is called, to contribute to what is called visual studies. And in this process, to put together, for example, a painting by Rembrandt and a microscopic image of a cell. And he expressed a certain skepticism regarding that, which I think it's quite right, and he was justified to do this. And the second example I have in mind, and it's something that you all know here, is the famous, or rather infamous, Alan Sokal scandal, because it was a scandal. I'm sorry about this journalistic term, but I don't have another one, at least in English. remember that in '97 he published a paper in a very famous cultural studies journal, academic journal, very pretentious, very intellectual, quote unquote. It was a paper about I don't know, something that tried to demonstrate that try to question the concept of that basically the external reality was essentially a social and linguistic construct. Alan Sokal being a physicist, and he tried in this article, in this essay, to demonstrate using some very postmodernist arsenal. After a while, he came out and said that everything was a hoax, that his article was not true, that was not scientifically based, and he pointed to the not only to the journal itself, but also to the whole postmodernist system, if I may say so, quote unquote system, right? But with the arsenal and way of demonstrating things using scientific arguments. So I think it's a sometimes risky enterprise to bring those two together. So from Elkin's skepticism to Sokal's I don't know, abrupt way of putting things. My question is, and I, to be honest, I don't have a clear answer to that, but I'm really curious what Anna, Claudia, Aliya, and Annick would believe about this. Is there a risk involved in putting these two together?
I think there's a risk involved in not doing it, because there's a lot of other media kind of types of things, like the press, advertising, things like that, that are affecting and manipulating people's views, social media, algorithms, whatever. And artists also have the potential to explore this and express it and reveal it as a kind of activism. So activism has been touched on quite a lot here, and there's a lot of big issues. We're all working. I mean, it's sort of subtle the way it's done, but it's about allowing people to have a way into seeing this sort of stuff. And maybe, I mean, maybe the problem's academia rather than art and science there, because you're talking about academic journals and you know, this magazine that wasn't peer reviewing externly, so they didn't use a physicist, and the title kind of sounds very poetic. So I think from an aesthetic point of view, because I got the title up actually, it's where is it? Transgressing the boundaries towards a transformative hermeneutics of quantum gravity. I mean, I think we can all get behind that. It sounds hilarious. It sounds like a great paper to read. Yeah, so it's this thing of like actually giving people the opportunity to kind of go into something or be introduced to something that they're not necessarily aware of. And some people talk about this idea of weak signals from the future as well. So it's like and I think it touched on this digital humanism idea that was brought up as well. Is this like it's about kind of showing people a mirror of what's going on. So I worked with engineers, and we did a project that was about looking at things like race and gender in robotics, and things like that. And these things kind of need to be brought out. So I would say that there's a risk in not bringing art and science together. Yeah, obviously there's always a risk in everything you do, but.
Claudia?
Yeah, it's just a small comment. So there are scientists manipulating science, academic science publication as well. So I find it a little bit of a tricky comparison, because there have been many scientific articles in big scientific journals that were mainly just a repetition of sentences like, you don't read my paper, you don't read my paper, or whatever. So there have been several cases around that. So it's a little bit tricky to say that is it art science? Is it art culture? Is it a questioning of a physicist? What are cultural studies techniques and all these things? So there is a lot in there. So it's not only art and science where there are potentials of misunderstood interventions and misinterpretations.
Mihaela, would you like to?
Yes, I should like to ask something, not about risks to put together art and science, but I ask why is necessary to put them together? Because people ask me, where is art here in this installation? They know about my love for this field, transdisciplinarity field of art and science, but ordinary people ask me this. Why is necessary to put together art and science?
So why?
There is no necessity at all. And there are many artworks that are created today throughout the world that are not art and science. So I think this is one potentiality, one path, one direction, which is very exciting and very interesting. But it's for me, it's one of the many of creating art. So that's point A. Point B is among the different ways or topics that art could address, why science or why scientific knowledge, methodologies, and so on. I would say why not? Because science is a way of understanding the world. It's a way of understanding us in the world. By the world, I mean the whole universe and everything in the universe up to the small cells and DNA. So I think it's, Anna, at some point you said storytelling, and I think art and science are telling stories, and sciences, plural, are telling stories about what we are and where we are, where we are getting to. And I think art too. Art is a way to tell stories, and it's very interesting to bring together those two storytellers because they are approaching the same things from different angles, and it's where this somebody talk about liminal spaces. It's where those things mingle, and the artworks remain the artworks. And like in every other fields, you have absolutely fabulous artworks that are art science works, and others that are just not interesting, I would say. So it's not because it's art science, but it is interesting, and some are masterpieces of the 20th and 21st centuries, and others will be forgotten, and we will be very happy that they are forgotten.
And another question is, could be necessary to invent another word for this kind of art and not use the term art itself, because could be could be an old word, art.
Can I jump in and answer a very quick answer? I think this, we don't need another term. Art is just fine. Art in general is fine. The term itself is super fine. Thank you, Anna. I'm super skeptical related to post everything. Today we have post everything, post human, post internet, post Zoom, post we, post us post. We're not post. We're still into that. So I think we're just fine with art as it is. Boom, whatever that the definition of art would mean today. And I leave it open, totally open.
Thank you. So we do have one other question online, but before that, I would just like to press this thing a bit, this thing which Horea mentioned earlier and which Annick kind of hinted to in her presentation. So I was thinking, you know, generally speaking, is there a place for like an ethics of bioart and art and science generally? Because basically, you know, Anna is working with E. coli, let's say, right? This sounds dangerous, right? I mean, who is responsible for this kind of merging between art and science? I mean, supposedly working with, you know, various ways in which weren't really explored at this level, at the level of, you know, exhibitions and so on. So can we think about a general way in which the question of the ethics of arts and sciences can be put? What do you think? Anna? Yes.
Well, thank you for plugging my book. Trust me, I'm an artist, Towards an Ethics of Art-Science Collaboration, a project that Annick was heavily involved with as well, which was exactly about that. It was about understanding the ethical implications of artists working in labs. And what we did for this was we set up ethics committees in different countries based on the country's model of having an ethics committee to debate an artist project that was ethically complex, and we did that in front of an audience to reveal the whole process to people and the thinking of the artist and the thinking of the ethicists, and then allow the audience to ask questions and kind of critique the whole process as well. And this is all written up in this book, available on my website, I might add. But you know, beyond that, you're kind of reliant on the scientists if you're working with these kind of things, because work with E. coli, that's not the half of it. Work with dangerous pathogens, category 3 pathogens. I've had to have typhoid vaccinations to go into the lab to do projects working with fecal samples from patients who are anonymized and we don't know what they're, you know, what diseases they have and things. I get very much in there, but obviously I have to go through all the health and safety things that the scientists have to do. When I did a residency at University of California, Irvine, I was 3 days doing an online CBT, computer-based training, to make myself ready for the lab. And if I hadn't passed it, I would have had to do it again, another 3 days of training. And there were people in the lab that had failed it first time. Luckily, I passed it first time, but you had to even learn how to handle radioactive isotopes, which I wasn't going to do at all. And, you know, dealing with fires and all this sort of stuff, which wouldn't have normally come up. And then to get things out of the lab, then you have to think, you know, how would you destroy this? Because at some point things do leave the lab, they get killed in some way and they go to the refuse dump, or they go to landfill or whatever. So if you think about what process, you know, is needed for that, then you can kind of think about ways of taking things out of the lab or ways of doing things. And if the artists understand how the scientists are working and the scientists understand what the artists need, and I would also refer you to another paper published by FEMS Microbiology Letters, Bacteria on Display, Can We, Should We, by myself and Nicola Fawcett. We've dealt with this quite extensively. So yes, there's a very strong issue there, and artists and scientists need to really work together to solve it. But it's quite fun. I would add, it's quite fun. It's quite interesting.
Would you please write the title of the article of the last one in the chat, maybe just to...
Yeah.
Thank you. Meanwhile, I would read a question from Sabina Suru, which we received online. So if anyone wants to sketch an answer. So Sabina says, from the perspective of an insider, as it were, a very young art and science scene, which is like the Romanian one, where artists and researchers and institutes don't have a history of working together, how can this kind of connection be fostered outside of organized programs like residencies? I mean, what would you think are the kind of projects needed in helping opening a kind of functional dialogue between artists and scientists, in kind of creating this infrastructure? So, I mean, you know, I was really struck by Aliya saying in her presentation that, you know, look, art and science can actually modify institutions themselves. So this question is kind of similar in a way. So consider there is no institutional framework for collaboration. How would any of you think about, you know, fostering one, about, you know, getting the right ingredients in such a space as, you know, let's say Romania, where there's no history with this? Annick, please.
Oh, this is a tricky question also because I'm not Romanian, so I don't know your environment. But I understand that Qolony is starting this process, right? It's a first platform and group of people, and I think that two very simple ways to plant the seeds is to invite people that have experience in those activities to give lectures, and to invite scientists that are interested. And this is really a one-to-one personal relationship. And I'm sure you know some scientists that are interested in those issues and that can come to talk about their own practice as scientists, and have an artist talk about his or her art in the same field. And another one is organizing workshops, because it does not require necessarily a lot of money. And it's a way where people talk to each other, learn to know each other, and then you can bring it to the next level, which is the institutional level of art schools or university, like what Aliya does, or whatever. But I believe strongly in people meeting people as a good way to.
So the right way to go would be just bottom up, right?
Oh, probably. Oh, sorry. Yes, Annick.
I'm the kind of person that likes it this way, but I'm working with Roger Molina that is very much organizing things. I mean, like to propose things at an institutional level. I guess both can go together.
Yeah, I agree that both can go together, but it really depends on the project and the initiative. But maybe one of the first things to do could be think of the project that you want, that would unite people from different spheres, that would be interesting to scientists and to artists, and that would become a starting point. Probably that would help to institutionalize this collaboration further on.
Yeah, I think this helps getting people excited, but also getting a little bit better and create an understanding of what actually happens. So what I see is often that there is a first interest, and then people are a little bit scared of realizing projects because they don't see the immediate benefits. So identifying benefits, talking about anecdotal evidence, how great projects can be, is a good help, and also helps people in organizations to be a little bit more secure about their decisions when they want to start programs and projects. Because you don't, so as soon as you want to bring it into institutions, you should not forget that there are people in positions who risk their own position if they allow something like that in, and they don't have a good handle over it or a good understanding of what it's going to be.
Can I just?
Anna, would you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it was 2 years ago today, I was saying to Mihaela earlier that I was in Timișoara giving the workshop for the co-art program there. And I've been in touch for a while with people at the Biocoder Dojo, and this is a program for young people to learn synthetic biology. Like, it's a kind of after school club. They're sort of between 11 and about 18. And I went and gave a talk for them as well on a voluntary basis. And I've never had such a good reception to my work with the art, and they understood all the science as well. And they got the art, they got the science. And so I think like the way the education's going now, like young people like that, they'll be the science collaborators of the future. And, you know, it's better than, you know, in the UK or something like that. They were brilliant. So, you know, I think in the future, you've got these like, they're going to be scientists, they're going to be open to running programs and things like that. So I think it's coming. It's just and the people organizing that obviously very open to that sort of thing as well, and they were from the science side. So I think there's people there. I think there's lots of people there. I get approached quite often by scientists in Romania and medics in Romania who are interested in developing this stuff, but also having lived in Glatz in the early 90s and knowing academics at the university there, I can imagine that would be quite a hard, you know, thing to push with that culture. So but I think it's about people and kind of networks and just, yeah, as Annick was saying, like the fundamental kind of just people getting together.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I think we have to take the last question, so it's pretty late. Mihaela, would you care to have one?
Yes, I have a question for Claudia, because I want to know if an art and science curator is a particular one. What is he or she doing in particular for this transdisciplinary field? Is a special kind of curator?
I think it's not only me, it's also Annick who's also curating, and she's got extensive experience. I always tell her that she's a really great role model for me in her experience in curating and working with art and science. But maybe when you come to some specific competencies somebody has to have working in this field, I think it's important when you art and science collaboration, when you start early in the collaboration, also work with the institutions, you do not work with the artist and then curate some shows. You also have to work with the institution, with the scientists. So you need to learn to translate, build connections, support people with their ideas, help them to not only propose something and then be scared of pushing their own ideas because maybe somebody from another field might get, be shocked, be scared, whatever. Really to push ideas to work together and to help them to work together in a specific way. Sometimes this happens automatically. Some artists and scientists are brilliant in doing that. Others need a lot of support, a lot of help at the beginning. Often this curation also does not only mean to help curating the artwork and producing the artwork, but also help facilitating within the organization when it's embedded in a scientific organization or in another organization like an R&D department of a company. So there are a lot of skills that you probably need to develop, especially for working with these different communities and different needs that there are. And then, of course, there is another way of also curating the shows. With the last Traveling Plant event in Évora, where we did with Annick and Marta de Menezes and Tatiana Koshkina, we also discussed a little bit of what are new ways of curating and how are art science exhibitions curated in a different way? How do these works maybe speak differently to each other as you're often used to in contemporary art spaces? So this is another thing that is probably an important aspect to think of. but I'm sure Annick wants to say something as well about this.
Well, actually, not really. I think that you have covered quite well the issue. I believe it may be like, I would like to have Anna's point of view also on this. I think it's like in other curation. I think you have to know what you are doing and what you are talking about. And so this requires to know a little bit the field the artists are working in. But going back to the distinction between process and outcomes, there are two things: that curating the residency and the collaboration, and curating the shows. And I think it's two different things. And for sure, curating the collaborations and the residency, you really need to be bilingual to have some knowledge in art and some knowledge in science. Otherwise, you just I think it's a plus. Curating a show, it really depends on the works. I mean, if it's a work that is non-living, for instance, I mean, if you exhibit living in boy art, living things, this requires a little bit of other knowledge than exhibiting stuff which is inert. But yeah, Anna, I would like to hear you.
I think the most important thing about the curator's perspective is, from the artist's perspective, is when you're having a conversation and they make you realize things about the work that you haven't seen yourself, because you can't be outside of yourself and you're so deeply in it. And that's something that I've had conversations with Annick and Claudia about already. So and Mihaela too, about this kind of this reflecting, you know, on the work and seeing it from other sides is something that I find really important. I think that's probably the most important thing, and then that does require, you know, some knowledge, some understanding, and passion and interest, I think, from the curators as well.
And Aliya, I think you have already also curated shows.
Sorry, I don't have a curatorial experience, but I'm just recalling our discussion with speakers at the master's program when we were thinking whether we should include curating art and science projects in the curriculum or not, because like the program is focused on artists. And all of the artists were like, if someone wants to be a curator in the field of art and science, they should definitely apply to the program and see how artists work, so that they know all the processes they go through when it comes to all the technical and scientific research. So it's really crucial probably for artists, for curators, understand how the work is done and all these processes. That's what I wanted to add.
I would just like to add something, having this not only recent experience with Orlan, which actually puts a lot of into connection art and science, especially through her performances in the 90s, but not only. Anyway, but I think from the curatorial point of view, depends very much on the nature of the works, and I totally agree with Annick, who says that. With the risk to oversimplify it, I think it's a problem of management and marketing after all. So leaving apart the whole I don't know theoretical explanation of that, I think in terms of curatorship is a question of management and marketing, because there are certain things of I don't know, like in a performance, it's depending on the quality of works, is a certain degree of uncertainty about the outcome of the works. So if you have a performance, it's the same, I don't know, uncertainty about that. The same with, I don't know, the development of a certain, I don't know, cells in the exhibition. So once again, I think the mechanisms are pretty much the same. It's a question of management and marketing, but the whole activity is pretty much the same. I don't see a big difference into that. Going back to Mihaila's question about how curating such an event would involve.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you. Yeah, so this was fun. I've learned a lot. So I think we are running a bit late. I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants and all the people watching online for their being a part of this project. And also, I would like, of course, to invite everyone to join us tomorrow at the same hour at 6 p.m. in Romania, to join us if they like for the second panel. So right now, I would like to thank again everyone and to ask Andrei Raicu, who did a performance to which we will shortly turn, to say a couple of words about his performance, which we will see in a short time, just as an ending to this discussion. So Andrei is an experimental artist, if I can label him as such, and his performance is titled Organic Waves, if I got it right. So Andrei, would you say a couple of words?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Sorry for joining so late. I had some rehearsals I was attending. Yes, the name is Organic Waves because I started working with biofeedback from the plants like 2 years ago when the pandemic started, and when we were in the lockdown. I started to research how to make music more organically, to make music more organically. Yeah, that was the idea. And then I found this this idea of biofeedback, and from there I started to work with plants. First of all, with plants. On a second part, but not in this performance, I recorded for fusion talks. I also used biofeedback from humans, like in performances, theatrical performances, and so on, when I was working in Berlin. So my question was how to make music more organic, and somehow it's like that was my definition then, like the plants are very organic, so why not working with them without harassing them somehow, because I don't make anything from them. I use electrodes like in EEG machines for humans, and the modular synthesizer, because I use a modular synthesizer to make music. The synthesizer receives only the current, the electrical flow from the plant. So I don't harass not in any way the plant. And the idea somehow is very simple, because in the first part of my research, to say like this, the first part was like the plant is singing on notes. It's singing notes on some and the melody on some instrument. But now I started to work with the plant, like sending also modulations, and modulate the sound and become more natural. So first of all, I record somehow the notes the plant sends, and then also work with the voltage that come from the plants to modulate the sound. So somehow the sound is analog one from oscillators, but it's also influenced by it's always influenced by the plant. Also the sequences are influenced by the plants. shortly.
That's cool. Thank you. So I think we can, I mean, I invite everyone to stay with our stream and see Andrei's performance. I'm not sure about the technical details. I think we will just gonna plot the performance on the screen, so in the same feed. So basically, thanks again, everyone, and hopefully see you tomorrow at 6 Romanian time.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mihaela.
Bye.
Elena,
Thank
Ovidiu,
you.
Bye.
Paul, bye.